we've chosen a positive sounding title because we do feel quite positive, actually, notwithstanding some of the things that Vic's just been talking about in terms of the challenges of the market, what feels sometimes like relentless bad news concerning environmental issues and climate change in particular. But nonetheless, we are now seeing the deployment of key low and zero carbon technologies, at speed, and we are now well into the S-curve of adoption. If you're familiar with that, the sort of slow initial pace and then the inflection and the acceleration of adoption across, many of the key technologies that we think are critical to the zero carbon transition, whether that's renewables or electric cars or heat pumps. These are no longer niche technologies. They are now very much the mainstream. So we need to go faster, but overall, a relatively positive message. We are seeing real change now. The other core message in our impact report is around our impact model, which we have shared before, but has become really our sort of modus operandi, if you like, for how at WHEB we think we structure and resource our impact activities. And actually, we think that as a model, it's something that the industry as a whole can think about, and it's already becoming a bit more evident in standards and potentially regulation as well. And the core is this idea that there are two elements to impact as an asset manager. There's the what we call the enterprise impact, which is the bit that runs down the middle of that chart. So, we take our clients' values and implement them, interpret them in how we then intentionally invest in companies that have a positive impact through the products and services that they sell. And we construct a portfolio of companies. We use various tools to help us do that. And these companies have a positive impact in the real world through the products and services that they sell. And we call that the enterprise impact. And I'm going to spend a bit of time just talking about some of the tools that we use and that we cover in the report. And then I'll come back to the investor contribution, which is the second piece, these two distinct elements of positive impact. So just in terms of the enterprise impact, one of the key tools for us, and which we've talked about before, is our impact engine. We've been using it now for over 3 years, but it is still quite innovative and there's a lot of interest in it. So we've included quite a bit more detail in how we apply the impact engine in practice. This slide here just shows you one of the graphics that's in the report that tries to give our clients and other readers of the report a bit more insight into how we apply the different questions. I won't go through it in detail now, but there are 6 questions, 2 each on these 3 areas, focusing on the importance of the relative importance of the outcome that you're achieving, whether that's an improvement in safety or improvement in health outcomes or environmental outcomes. So the importance of those outcomes. The second piece is around the scale of improvement in those outcomes. How much of an improvement are you seeing as a consequence of using this particular product? And the third is around the particular contribution that company is making. And we also include in the report a work example using SolarEdge, which is one of our cleaner energy investments, to show how those questions apply in practice. So we hope that's a useful additional level of detail around a key tool for us, and we think it's something that the market should be interested in as well. Another tool that we have in our report and also on the website actually is our impact map. Once you have this data, once you have the ability to assess positive impact and score it relative to one another, you can begin to plot that on a chart like we have here. So you have the positive impact on the x-axis, and then the fundamental quality, which includes an assessment of ESG on the y-axis, and you can plot each of those dots is one of our portfolio holdings. And then, of course, over time, you can see how that changes. So I've just tried to emphasize the buys and sells during 2022. So the triangles are companies that we sold, and the squares are companies that we bought. And these included companies like Intertek, which had a relatively low impact score. So I think this one down here was Intertek. Some of them, though, had a rather higher score. So LHC Group was an American business that got acquired, and so we sold that from the portfolio. But we have also added some high-scoring impact stocks as well. This is GenMab in our health theme that we bought during the year. And the consequence of this is, on average, a significant improvement in quality. So when we saw the market correct early on in 2022, we took that as an opportunity to buy some of these higher quality businesses that had become cheaper, and we were able to use that to our advantage. So you can see a significant jump in the quality of the portfolio. And in terms of impact, it's a very slight decline. It's essentially the same level of impact. It would have been higher were it not for the fact that we sold some of these. LHC was acquired, and so we had to sell that. Another one, Orpea, we sold as a consequence of some issues that business was facing. So on balance, we think a positive move, certainly in terms of quality, and over the long term, we would expect our average to be moving up towards the top right. So that's another framework that we use in the report to explain how the portfolio has changed year on year from an impact point of view. And then finally, the third tool that we obviously report on and update each year is our impact calculator. So this is measuring the positive impact that's associated with a given level of investment in the strategy, in this case, £1 million. And this is the positive impact that's associated with that. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with that tool, but if you're not, you can go onto our website, type in the amount of money you or your client has invested in the strategy, and it will generate the data for that level of investment. There are a couple of changes this year. Down here in the bottom right, we've included a new indicator, which is looking at the amount of money that is spent on research and development tools or equipment that's supplied by WHEB portfolio companies. And this is then used to develop positive impact products, typically in healthcare, but also some environmental products as well. It's a slightly different indicator. It's upstream. It's an enabler. The R&D equipment is enabling positive outcomes, but we thought it was a useful addition to the overall calculator. The other significant change is that in previous years, we've sourced the data ourselves and calculated these impact numbers ourselves. It's been peer reviewed by the Carbon Trust in previous years. This year, we've moved to use an independent third party to source that data called Net Purpose. We think ultimately it'll be good really for the quality of the data to have and for the comparability of the data as well to use third parties. So we've moved to use Net Purpose. That's just on the measurement, by the way. I should say the impact engine itself, all that work, obviously we continue to do ourselves in-house. That's sort of proprietary to WHEB. And then the final thing just to say about the impact calculator is one of the things that our advisory committee have encouraged us to do is to try and develop our reporting of the negative impacts associated with the products and services that companies sell. So this calculator really is focused on the positive impacts. We do capture some of the negative impacts, particularly around greenhouse gas emissions. So we invest in a lot of companies that sell equipment that then uses electricity. And we capture that through our Scope 3 greenhouse gas reporting. But there are other impacts as well, and we do need to try and do a better job at capturing that information. It's difficult because companies tend not to report it, but we acknowledge that that's an area that we need to try and improve on. So that's the three tools, the impact engine, the impact map, and the impact calculator that talk about the enterprise impact. Just coming back to this model, the second part that we are very focused on is around the investor contribution, what WHEB itself can do to improve outcomes. And that's largely through the engagement we do both with companies, with clients, and also with the system as a whole, policymakers, standard setters, and others that are producing guidance for the market. And we've done a lot of work in that space as well. So just to cover a couple of points here, there's obviously much more in the report. The first piece is around carbon emissions. So this is looking at the carbon emissions from the companies themselves. We capture the positive impact of the products in terms of reducing emissions in our impact calculator. This is looking at scope 1 and 2 emissions from the operations of the businesses that we invest in. On the left-hand side here, you have our targets around getting portfolio companies to commit to go to net zero carbon. And we achieved our first target 3 years early. So we've now launched a new target, a new set of targets, which is shown by this dotted line. And that is that 85% of our portfolio emissions, so the emissions coming from the operations of the companies in the portfolio, should be covered by a carbon target by 2025. So it's 85% covered by 2025. And by 2028, it should be 100%. And you can see our progress here in green. So by the end of 2022, we were at about 80% of the portfolio of emissions from the portfolio are now covered by a net zero carbon target of 2050 or earlier. So we are seeing good progress there in terms of the targets. On the right-hand side, you've got the actual emission reductions that are being delivered. You've got our targets here in the dotted black line. So by 2030, we want to see a 50% reduction from the 2019 baseline. And then by 2050, we should be fully net zero carbon. And then you've got our financed emissions here. So this is the carbon footprint of the portfolio, if you like. And this is affected by buys and sells. And you can see this dramatic fall in 2020. That was as a result of our selling a waste to energy business called China Everbright Environment Group. That was responsible for about 70% of our carbon emissions. We don't consider waste to energy to be a solution anymore. So we sold that business, and as a consequence, we had this dramatic fall in our carbon footprint. The other line which is important here is this greeny blue line. And this is the ongoing emissions from companies held in the portfolio. So it eliminates the buys and sells. It's just the actual reductions delivered by companies that have been in the portfolio over this period. And that was a pretty good story for the first 2 years. We were delivering about a 5% reduction per year. It needs to be 7% to meet the Paris Agreement, but not too bad at 5%. Unfortunately, last year we saw a 5% increase, and that was partly due to a COVID rebound. So increased sales from companies led to increased emissions, and particularly from a small group of companies that are seeing very dramatic increase in sales. So SolarEdge, the company I mentioned earlier on, who sell components that go on the back of solar modules, they're growing extremely quickly, and they haven't decarbonized their energy supply yet. So they are seeing a dramatic increase in their emissions. In a way, we want that because we want them to sell more products, but we do need to see them decarbonize their own energy use, and that's something that we are working hard on with them. And that was the second point that I just wanted to make about this, the engagement work that we're doing with companies. This chart shows you how skewed our emissions profile is actually. These are our top 5 emitters, and together they are responsible for about 75% of our emissions. In fact, the bottom 10 emitters in the portfolio are responsible for less than 0.1%. So overwhelmingly, this is the area we need to focus on in terms of getting these companies to reduce their emissions. And we've done a pretty good job, I would say, so far in getting them to commit to reduce their emissions. So Linde, for example, which on its own, it's an industrial gases company, on its own, nearly a third of our emissions come from Linde. They now have a net zero carbon target, and it's been validated by the Science Based Targets Initiative. And that was done at our request, not just us, other investors as well. But we think we've had a significant role in pushing that company to set that target, a robust target. The other company that's interesting here is J.B. Hunt. They haven't set any emission targets yet. They are very serious about climate change. There's no question that they really are applying their brains to the issue. Their challenge is that they are very dependent on their supply chain. So they run logistics services, mainly intermodal in the US, so moving freight from road to rail, but they do run a lot of trucks, and they're dependent on the truck manufacturers to come forward with electric or fuel cell trucks, zero carbon emission vehicles. And so far they haven't done that, but we are seeing that change literally in the last sort of 6 to 9 months. We've seen some of the truck OEMs, including Tesla, bring forward their technology in this area. So we hope that will change in the next couple of years, and we can get J.B. Hunt to commit to a net zero carbon target. And then finally, First Solar, I just thought it's interesting really that this company is on this list. This is clearly a company that's providing a solution in the form of solar modules, but solar modules do use energy in their manufacture. Solar, we have a low footprint overall, and First Solar is one of the businesses that now crops up in our top 5. They do need to do a better job at reducing their own emissions, and again, it's something that we have talked to them about a number of times, and we're hopeful that that will happen. They have set a target by 2050, so we're hoping that that will lead to reduced emissions, and that's true for all of our companies. Really, we've got these commitments in place now. We expect that to flow through into actual reductions in the next few years. And then a final couple of slides from me, and then we'll hand over to questions. I mentioned the role that we play in terms of trying to shape the operating environment that we work in, the regulations, the standards that are set around impact investing and sustainable investing. And we've done a huge amount of work here over the last year. We've been a key contributor to the Global Impact Investing Network's guidance on impact investing in listed equities. Got a nice quote from them on the slide. I think that's a really important document that really helps to set standards around what we think impact investing in listed equities should look like. We've also been working with the FCA on their sustainability disclosure requirements. We're looking forward to seeing those published in the next quarter. Now it turns out it's going to be the final quarter this year. The FCA announced yesterday, but we've worked very closely with them and with the advisory group that we're part of for the FCA. And we're also on the technical committees of the British Standards Institute, BSI. They're developing standards on sustainable finance, and we're feeding into that to try and ensure that those have high standards in terms of what they define as being sustainable and impact. So we are playing, I think, for a small business, we're playing an outsized role really in terms of how we're shaping these important regulations and standards. And then finally, on transparency, kind of more generally, we have a strong view on what transparency fund managers should provide. We provide a huge amount of transparency around what we do, what we invest in, and why. We think it's a strength of ours. You've got the impact map, the impact calculator that I've talked about. We've got 2 new reports this year, our net zero carbon report, which is just about our approach to carbon and greenhouse gas emissions. We've got our stewardship and engagement brochure, and then you've got all our other reports, the stewardship reports, the impact reports, the minutes of our advisory committee meetings, which we're having one tomorrow, so the minutes of that will come out hopefully next week. And of course, the profiles of each of the companies that we invest in. Every single company we invest in, an A4 sheet that describes what the company does and why we invest in it, as well as other information. And frankly, we think all asset managers, certainly all impact asset managers, should provide this level of detail. We think it's a bit outrageous, frankly, that a lot of managers just tell you their top 10 holdings. We think everything should be disclosed in terms of their investments. As I say, certainly for impact managers, but perhaps for all asset managers should be required to disclose their full holdings. We think that would be an important step forward. So there's lots more information in the report. I'd encourage you to take a look at it, but that concludes our presentation this morning.